Now I want to add more to this off-screen later. Most importantly, when creating a new account, users also should be required to upload an image. So they should be able to take an image and then upload it, and we'll add this functionality later. For the moment, I instead want to make sure that we show a different screen if we did sign up or log in. Because at the moment we always stay on that screen, and that's of course not the goal. And to show a different screen, we can also leverage that authentication token. Because the existence of such a token in the end proves that the user provided valid data, because the backend will only create and return such an authentication token if valid credentials were provided. Hence, this authentication token in the end tells us, in our Flutter app, that a user did log in. And I want to show a different screen if a user did log in. Now, in addition, I also mentioned that that token will be stored on the device and that that storage will be managed by Firebase, which of course is quite convenient. And therefore, it's not just about reacting to the user logging in or signing up, but it also means that if we start the app and the user logged in before, when they used the app before, maybe a couple of minutes ago, we also want to start on a different screen and not the auth screen again. So if a user logged in the past, we want to keep the user logged in and not always restart at the auth screen. So ultimately, it's about showing a different screen here instead of the auth screen if we have such a token, either because a user just finished logging in or signing up, or because a user signed up or logged in the past. And therefore here, I'll start by adding a new screen, and that will be my chat screen, the chat Dart file, which later, as you might guess, will in the end be responsible for displaying these chat messages and so on. But for the moment in there, I'll just create a very simple class, the chat screen class, which extends state-less widget here, because for now we won't need any state functionalities in there. And then here in the build method, I want to return a scaffold widget, of course, to get that base screen setup and that base styling. And here I want to add an app bar with the built-in app bar widget, where I add a title that in the end displays a text widget that could say Flutter chat or anything like that. And then below the app bar, I'll set up my body. And here for the moment, I'll just use the center widget as a placeholder to show a basic text here, where I could say logged in. And of course, that will change later, but that's my content on this chat screen for now. And now I want to show this chat screen whenever the user did log in. Now to do that, you could think that here in auth Dart, we in the end wait for the user to log in or sign up, and we then take a look at the returned credentials and see whether we got a token in there, and then we navigate to a different screen, but we're not going to do any of that. Instead here, I'll just get rid of my print statements, and I'll instead move on to the main Dart file, because it's in the end here where I either want to show the auth screen if we don't have such a token, or the chat screen if we do have one. And that should then also ensure that if the app is started and we have a token because the user logged in before, we automatically show the chat screen instead of starting with the auth screen again. Now to ensure that this all works the way it should work, I'll replace that auth screen as my home widget with another widget. And that other widget will be the stream builder widget provided by Flutter. Now that's a widget we haven't used up to this point, but it is quite similar to the future builder widget about which you did learn earlier. You might recall that future builder was used to listen to a future and then render different widgets based on the state of that future. Stream Builder is quite similar, but the difference between a future and a stream is that a future in the end will be done once it resolved, so it will only ever produce one value or error, whereas a stream, on the other hand, is capable of producing multiple values over time. And Stream Builder wants a stream value therefore, and then also a builder function, which will be a function that automatically receives some context and then also a data snapshot. Now, just as with Future Builder, this function will be called by Flutter whenever the stream we'll connect here will emit a new value, and that snapshot in the end will give us access to that emitted value. Now, the stream I want to connect here is coming from my Firebase auth package, and there again from the instance, and there we can use the auth state changes method. And this method, as you can see here, will return a stream. So in the end here, we set up a listener that's in the end managed by the Firebase SDK under the hood, and Firebase will emit a new value whenever anything auth related changes. So for example, if a token becomes available, or if a token is removed because the user was logged out, for example. So auth state changes will give us such a stream, and snapshot therefore then in the end will be a user data package, you could say, created and emitted by Firebase. So here in the builder, we can then check if snapshot has data, so if we have some user data, and if that's the case, I want to return my chat screen, because that in the end will mean that we have a logged in user. Because Firebase will not emit any data if we don't have a logged in user, so if we don't have a token. Therefore, as an alternative, if we don't make it into this if check, if we don't have data, I will return my auth screen. And here, since I added const here, I also want to add it here. But for that, on the chat screen, I of course first of all have to add my const constructor. This is not a must do, but strongly recommended, like this. And with that added back in main.dart, we can either return the chat screen if we have data, so if we have a logged in user in the end. That's how this stream created by Firebase here will work. It will emit snapshots with data if we have a logged in user. And therefore, if we don't have data, we want to show the auth screen, because then we don't have a logged in user. With that out of the way, if you save that and reload, you should in the end up on this chat screen here, because I did create a user in the past and I also logged in the past. And as mentioned, I got back a token back then, and it was managed and stored by Firebase. The Firebase SDK did all that for us. Hence, that stored token is still there, and therefore, here, now that we added this logic, this already stored token will be picked up and leads to the chat screen being displayed instead of the auth screen. And that will even be the case if I quit my emulator here, and I restart it, so the same emulator, but restarted now, and I then run this app on it again. You will see that as this app starts, we again end up on that chat screen, because that token was managed and stored on the device and then automatically loaded by Firebase. And that's one of the reasons why we're using that SDK, because otherwise we would have to do all these things manually on our own.